In the annals of Roman history, few names stir as much scandal and fascination as that of Elagabalus, a teenage emperor whose reign was marked by shocking excess, bizarre rituals, and defiance of every convention Rome held sacred. Called by many the most perverse ruler to ever sit on the throne, his story is one of youthful power corrupted by decadence, sexual rebellion, and religious upheaval. This is the tale of the boy emperor who dared to rewrite the rules and paid the ultimate price. In the sprawling saga of the Roman Empire, a civilization renowned for its grandeur, military might, and complex politics, certain emperors have left marks so dark and scandalous that their names evoke shock and horror centuries later. Among these figures, none stands out quite like Elagabalus, a boy emperor whose reign was brief but infamous, whose behavior was so unorthodox and outrageous that he was branded by posterity as Rome's most perverse ruler. His story is a haunting tale of excess, religious fanaticism, sexual deviance, and political chaos that forever stained the imperial throne. Elagabalus was born in 203 AD in Emesa, a city in Syria, under the name Varius Avitus Bassianus. He was the hereditary high priest of the sun god Elagabal, also known as Heliogabalus, a deity worshipped with intense fervor in his homeland. His family belonged to a powerful priestly class with close ties to the Severn dynasty, the ruling house of Rome at the time. His grandmother, Julia Maesa, a shrewd and ambitious woman, recognized the political opportunity when the Emperor Caracalla was assassinated and the empire faced a power vacuum. Using her considerable influence and resources, Julia orchestrated the young boy's rapid elevation to the imperial throne in 218 AD. Despite his youth and relative inexperience, at just 14 years old, Elagabalus arrived in Rome to claim the ultimate seat of power. Yet, instead of adopting the traditional image of a Roman emperor, a military leader, statesman, and guardian of Roman values, he immediately began to shock and alienate the Roman elite and populace. His behavior was erratic and provocative from the start, and it quickly became clear that this young emperor was unlike any the empire had seen before. Perhaps the most scandalous and notorious aspect of Elagabalus's reign was his sexual conduct, which scandalized Roman society. While the modern term pedophile must be used carefully when discussing historical figures, the ancient sources describe Elagabalus as engaging in sexual relationships with boys and young men, some possibly minors by today's standards. The historian Cassius Dio, who was openly hostile to Elagabalus, portrays the emperor as indulging in these relationships without shame or discretion. According to Dio and other sources, Elagabalus frequently took male lovers and preferred them over women. His notorious marriage to a Vestal virgin, a sacred priestess sworn to lifelong celibacy, was itself an act of sacrilege, one that deeply offended Roman religious sensibilities and the public. The Vestal virgin was forbidden to marry or engage in sexual relations under penalty of death. Yet Elagabalus forced such a union, underscoring his utter disregard for Roman tradition and morality. Elagabalus's sexual preferences extended beyond mere relationships to acts that flouted the strict social and gender norms of his time. Ancient sources claim he was openly effeminate and sought to present himself as a woman rather than a man. Dio writes that the emperor wore women's clothing, adorned himself with makeup, and engaged in public behavior that blurred or erased gender distinctions. More shocking still were claims that he sought medical procedures to transform his body to resemble that of a woman, requesting physicians to create female genitalia. Whether these accounts are fully accurate or exaggerated by hostile chroniclers, they paint a picture of a ruler who actively defied the rigid gender roles and expectations of Roman society. This behavior, considered scandalous and unnatural by contemporary standards, deeply disturbed the Roman elite, contributing to his reputation as an immoral and perverse leader. In addition to his personal excesses, Elagabalus's reign was marked by a religious revolution that further alienated Rome's traditional institutions. He attempted to impose the worship of his Syrian sun god Elagabal as the supreme deity of the empire, above Jupiter and the other gods of the Roman pantheon. In a grand and controversial act, he transported the sacred black stone of Elagabalus, a meteorite revered in his homeland, to Rome, and installed it in a lavish temple. He demanded that Roman citizens participate in rituals honoring this foreign god, disrupting centuries of religious tradition. These ceremonies were often extravagant and scandalous, featuring wild parties, public feasts, and performances that offended Roman sensibilities. The emperor himself participated in rituals dressed in strange garments, adding to his image as an eccentric and dangerous religious zealot. Elagabalus's rejection of traditional Roman values extended into his political life, where he frequently ignored the advice of the Senate, the military, and his own advisors. His behavior and policies caused widespread unrest and dissatisfaction among the ruling classes. Even his grandmother, Julia Maesa, who had engineered his rise to power, grew increasingly disillusioned as his excesses threatened the stability of the empire. His disregard for statecraft and his focus on personal pleasure and religious fanaticism undermined his legitimacy and control. The tension between Elagabalus and Rome's powerful institutions came to a head when his cousin Severus Alexander, also backed by Julia Maesa, was positioned as a rival claimant to the throne. In 222 AD, just 4 years after his accession, Elagabalus was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, who sided with Alexander. His death marked the end of one of the most bizarre and scandalous reigns in Roman history. Following his assassination, the Senate ordered a damnatio memoriae, an official condemnation designed to erase Elagabalus's name and memory from public monuments and records. This effort to obliterate his legacy was unprecedented and reflected the deep revulsion that his rule had inspired. Despite this attempt to erase him from history, the lurid tales of Elagabalus's reign survived through the writings of historians and chroniclers, ensuring that his story would continue to fascinate and horrify for centuries. He remains a symbol of unchecked power corrupted by personal obsession, decadence, and defiance of social norms. His life challenges modern audiences to consider complex issues of gender, sexuality, and power in a time when such concepts were rigidly policed and taboo. In many ways, Elagabalus was a product of his turbulent times, a young man thrust into unimaginable power and responding with behavior that defied the strict conventions of Roman society. Whether seen as a mad tyrant, a misunderstood figure ahead of his time, or simply a cautionary example of imperial excess, his reign stands as a vivid and unforgettable chapter in the history of Rome. The title, The Pedophile on the Throne, captures the shocking and disturbing elements of his personal life that so scandalized ancient Rome, while Rome's most perverse emperor speaks to the broader context of his reign marked by sexual deviance, religious upheaval, and political chaos. Together, these elements create a portrait of an emperor whose story continues to captivate and provoke, reminding us of the dark extremes of power and human behavior. To fully understand the scandalous nature of Elagabalus's reign, one must first grasp the context of Roman society in the early 3rd century AD. Rome was a deeply patriarchal and conservative civilization, where the emperor was expected to embody traditional Roman virtues, strength, discipline, and religious piety. The emperor was also the chief priest and protector of Rome's state religion, tasked with maintaining the favor of the gods through rituals and moral leadership. Public image was everything, and emperors who deviated from accepted norms risked not only their reputation, but also their survival. Sexuality in Rome was complex, governed not by a rigid concept of orientation as understood today, but by social status, roles, and behaviors. Roman men were expected to demonstrate dominance and masculinity, particularly in their public and political lives. While extramarital affairs and homosexual relationships were not unheard of, they had to conform to strict social rules, usually involving the man assuming the active role and the partner being of lower status. However, Elagabalus flagrantly disregarded these conventions. His preference for young male lovers, often described as passive or effeminate, overturned these societal norms and deeply unsettled the Roman elite. Moreover, the emperor's apparent desire to change his sex and live as a woman challenged the fundamental gender binaries of the time. Gender roles were rigidly enforced in Roman society, with clear distinctions between male and female duties, appearances, and expectations. Elagabalus's cross-dressing, use of makeup, and attempts to undergo medical transformation were unprecedented among Roman rulers and considered scandalous acts of sacrilege by many. These behaviors were not merely personal quirks, but public statements that undermined the traditional order, further alienating him from the Senate, military commanders, and religious leaders. Elagabalus's religious zealotry must also be understood in the context of Rome's complex religious landscape. The empire was polytheistic, worshipping a pantheon of gods with well-established rituals and festivals. Emperors were expected to honor these deities, preserving Roman religious traditions that had been central to Rome's identity and stability for centuries. By forcibly imposing the worship of his Syrian sun god Elagabalus and elevating it above Jupiter, Elagabalus was perceived not only as religiously unorthodox, but as threatening the very foundation of Roman state religion. His flamboyant ceremonies, which included lavish banquets, exotic dancers, and sacrilegious displays, were seen as a direct affront to Roman values and piety. The atmosphere at court under Elagabalus was one of decadence and chaos. The young emperor surrounded himself with favorites and courtiers who indulged his every whim, further exacerbating the empire's instability. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite imperial bodyguards, played a crucial role in both supporting and eventually ending his rule. Initially loyal, they became disillusioned as Elagabalus's eccentricities and mismanagement alienated powerful factions. Their eventual betrayal and assassination of the emperor were motivated by political pragmatism, as much as by outrage at his behavior. The Praetorian Guard's power to make and break emperors made them kingmakers of the empire, and their decisive action against Elagabalus paved the way for his more conventional cousin Severus Alexander to take the throne. Politically, Elagabalus's reign occurred during a period of crisis and transition for Rome. The Severan dynasty was grappling with internal strife, military pressures on the empire's borders, and economic difficulties. In this volatile environment, the emperor's focus on personal excess and religious imposition was seen as a dangerous distraction from the empire's real needs. His failure to command the loyalty of the army and Senate undermined Rome's stability and hastened his downfall. The swift assassination and subsequent erasure of his memory through damnatio memoriae were attempts by the ruling elite to restore order and rehabilitate the imperial image. The legacy of Elagabalus is complicated and layered. On one hand, he is remembered as a symbol of decadence, moral decay, and dangerous excess. On the other, modern interpretations invite us to reconsider his actions through the lens of gender identity and the constraints of power in ancient Rome. His life raises questions about how societies deal with difference, rebellion, and the limits of tolerance, questions that remain relevant today. His brief and tumultuous reign remains a powerful story of how absolute power can be twisted by personal desire, alienation, and the refusal to conform to societal expectations. In conclusion, the story of Elagabalus, the so-called pedophile on the throne, and Rome's most perverse emperor, is a multifaceted tale of youthful excess, sexual and gender nonconformity, religious upheaval, and political chaos. His life and reign offer a unique window into the tensions and contradictions of Roman imperial power and society, as well as the dangers faced by those who challenge deeply entrenched norms. His name endures not just as a footnote of scandal, but as a striking reminder of the complex human dimensions behind history's grand narratives.